Good afternoon. It's really a privilege and an honor to be here. Your program says it takes a village. Well, it also takes a mayor. And Shakil Syed is the mayor of this community in so many ways. This community, larger communities, the interfaith community that I work in, the civil liberties community that both of us work in. So you are so lucky to have a man of his caliber leading you, and the idea that your prison program, POP, was generated and conceived of by him, and then is being so well led by your imam. Yes. I'm aware that our time is moving. We have personal testimonies coming and some questions and answers. The worst place to be with an audience is somewhere between you and lunch. So I want to be very aware and very cautious of my time. Seriously, the death penalty is the worst end of the spectrum of everything we have been talking about today. Because, as Dr. Siddiqui said, in caring for the weak, in caring for the oppressed, we face racism, poverty, cruelty, and injustice. And there is no place in the criminal injustice system where all of those factors coalesce and are more of a threat to humanity and human dignity than the death penalty. The idea that to this day, our government takes upon itself to decide who will live and who will die in a system that is so plagued with human error, with the risk of executing innocent people, with the risk of sending to death row innocent people, and then in a system that is so plagued with racism and poverty. One man said they call it capital punishment because if you have the capital, you don't get the punishment. And in the case of the death penalty, that is the worst of the worst in our system. And it's serious. Today's Los Angeles Times, if you didn't get to your paper or your website before you came to this program, this is the front page of today's Los Angeles Times, which is able to show the photographs of the 16 men who are at the top of the list to be executed if the moratorium on the death penalty is ever lifted, which has focused on the question of the lethal injection, the cocktail of 3 drugs used to have the state kill people in this system. If that process of litigating the lethal injection cocktail is ever resolved, we know the names. We therefore know the families of these men. And there are 749 men and women on California's death row. We know that if this state ever took upon itself to begin the execution of these 749 men and women, and therefore all the men and women added to the system over the next months and years, if we the people, and it is we the people, these cases are called people versus so-and-so, if we in our names, as the people of the state of California, ever took it upon ourselves to begin to execute one inmate each week. It would take 14 years to execute the men and women on California's death row. We would have blood on our hands to deliberately, in a calculated fashion, kill one person every week. How can a civilized society do that? And when I say that, I say it in reflection of the fact that internationally, 2/3 of all countries across the face of the earth, 141 nations, have abolished the death penalty in law or in practice. As of 2010, the overwhelming majority of all recorded executions have only taken place in 5 countries on the face of the earth: China, Iran, North Korea, Yemen, and the United States of America. That is the company we keep by continuing to perpetuate the barbarous form of state killing. The movement's underway. While 31 states have the death penalty on the books, 30 states have not carried out an execution in the last 5 years. California has not carried out an execution in the last 10 years. 19 states have abolished the death penalty. And we know the legacy of slavery and racism because the states that continue to perpetuate the death penalty are clustered in Texas and in the South. Only 2% of all counties have carried out 56% of all executions in this country. So we know this is a racist system, and we know that public opinion is changing. The Death Penalty Information Center says that when given a choice, 61% of those polled prefer an alternative to the death penalty: life in prison with restitution to victims' families. And only 33% straight up would support the death penalty where you have an alternative. Now, we have an alternative here in California, and it's life in prison without possibility of parole. Some people oppose that. My view to you, ladies and gentlemen, is let's abolish the death penalty in California, and then we can address the question of whether it's fair and true to the nature of rehabilitation to isolate people for the rest of their lives and write them off. Because maybe we can believe in the change of the title of the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, which Governor Schwarzenegger made. He changed the name of the department, but that department has yet to live up to its role in rehabilitation. It is unbearable to think that in addition to all of the due process questions, in addition to the questions of disparity of poverty, of rich people getting good lawyers, and poor people having to work with the overworked and overtaxed public defender system, which is full of wonderful and good lawyers, but they do not have the resources to match the state when it comes to these cases. All of those defects. But it's unbearable to think we have a system in which innocent people have been executed. We know now of at least 152 exonerees from death rows across the country through DNA testing and the work of the Innocence Project and other programs. 152 people, some coming within hours of being executed, who were actually innocent of the crimes for which they were convicted. And listen to the statistics that break down that group. Of that 152, 79 were black. Look at the disparity right on the face of it. 59 were white, 12 were Latino, and 2 were marked as others. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a system which needs to be abolished. In 2012, colleagues here and elsewhere brought a ballot measure to abolish the death penalty in California. 2012, we got 48% on a major public policy law and order issue going to the voters for the first time. 2% we lost by. Mike Farrell, a great human rights activist and actor, you may remember Mike Farrell from MASH and other wonderful work, but Mike Farrell today has devoted himself to the abolition of the death penalty. And in September of this year, Mike Farrell introduced the language for a ballot measure on the 2016 ballot to abolish the death penalty in the state of California. The experts tell us in this state it'll take $10 million to mount a campaign, to collect the signatures, to put it on the ballot, to buy those expensive television ads and other campaign efforts to make this a reality. But I think we're up to that. A courageous judge in this county of Orange 2 years ago found the death penalty was unconstitutional. It was cruel and unusual punishment in violation of the 8th Amendment to the United States Constitution. That's the Jones case that was heard before the 9th Circuit Federal Court of Appeal. I was in Pasadena at that oral argument when the judges considered it. They may go off on some procedural issues which will not allow the fundamental question to be heard. And only in June did a United States Supreme Court Justice, Stephen Breyer, in a case called Glossop, entered a 46-page dissent in that case, cataloging how the death penalty in this country is cruel and unusual punishment. We believe we have 4 votes on the United States Supreme Court to declare the entire death penalty system unconstitutional. 1 more vote. Maybe Justice Kennedy of California, who may be aware of everything we've heard about today in terms of the flaws in our criminal justice system. We're going to be coming back to this community as that initiative moves forward. My brother Shakil Syed is on the board of directors of Death Penalty Focus. We believe that regardless of differences in doctrinal, scriptural, religious views, there are Catholics, Jews, Muslims, Quakers, Unitarians, and humanists who will rise in an interfaith movement, who will understand that there are moments when the tipping point of an injustice, when the American people organized against slavery, when the American people organized for the labor movement, when the American people organized for the civil rights movement, when the American people organized in the anti-war movement, and most recently when the American people organized around the rights of our gay and lesbian and transgendered brothers and sisters to have the right to marry. We believe there are moments in American history when all of the forces of justice, when the forces against racism, against poverty, against injustice come together. And we believe, whether it is through the ballot or through the courts, we are at that moment in this society when the worst of the worst in the criminal justice system, the notion of taking the life of another human being, will be abolished. And when we do that, we can continue all the good work you're hearing about in reforming men and women who've been sentenced to less than death to have a fair and just criminal justice system. I want to close by telling you that there's no stronger phrase, and it was alluded to by Dr. Siddiqui, of judging and understanding human dignity. A person is more than the worst thing they have ever done in their lives. Do not judge people by that worst thing they ever did. Judge them by their human dignity, their capacity for change, their capacity for rehabilitation and restoration. And if we came to believe and to understand those values and live those values, this would be a better society. Thank you very much.